Thank you everyone for joining me on another episode of Sitting Down with Scholars. I'm Jordan, a PhD student, and I'm joined this week by Tosin. Can you start off by telling myself and my guests a bit more about your academic career so far?
So thank you for having me, Jordan. So my academic career started in 2018. So initially I joined the University of Manchester and I studied mechanical engineering and went on to do a master's after that. Not too long after finishing my master's, I decided to go into nuclear engineering. But I did miss the aspects of stuff I did during my dissertation. So my dissertation was on renewable energy sources and in Nigeria and how to implement them. So I could miss the research aspect. So not long after graduating, I decided to do my own research. So I started making videos on TikTok on a title called The Science Show, where I would just do research on everyday things just to make it easy and accessible for kids. And I thought that was a way that I could still keep up with the day to days and just have the things I missed in university.
And with you saying that you had a transition from a mech engine to more nuclear engineering, are you so with your master's degree? Where are you up to currently? So education all done, working professionally, or still on your master's program?
So education's all done and currently working. So I work for an engineering consultancy, and particularly in the nuclear engineering field, nuclear new builds. So in the UK right now, there's two nuclear plants currently being built. So Hinkley Point C and Sizewell C. So I do a bit of work on both of those.
And like you say, so obviously still very passionate about research, even if in a more informal setting, I think would be a fair description to say. And so picking up on that passion side for yourself is what is it that really then promoted you to keep involved, keep engaged in that, particularly trying to, like you say, educate the next generation? What is it that really drives you with that?
I think for me, I think just have a curiosity for how certain things work. I think to be honest, it initially stemmed from when I first did start work. I did feel like the stuff you start when you are a graduate engineer isn't. I didn't think it was as intense as when I was studying, and I did miss the intensity. So initially, it did start as a way for me to maybe just use some of the stuff I learned in university, and then maybe just put it out to a way that's digestible to people who maybe didn't study engineering. And then from there, it just became a thing of, I think that there's an opportunity to make lots of videos for kids. And I think it was the same time I was started getting involved with STEM volunteering. So I thought I could bring the two worlds together where my interest in just doing research and also my STEM volunteering could come together. And I could even use the videos that I've made for just because I wanted to. And then I could bring them into the STEM volunteering that I was doing. So that's kind of how things came about.
No, it's really interesting, and it's interesting to see it from a professional side because I know many different guests that I've speak to are traditionally still either within academia or going through that process. And one of the things that's really interesting is to see you're still trying to do the STEM volunteering and particularly working, by the sounds of it, to take what is a clear passion of yours and that interest in how different things work to promoting that into a more digestible format, particularly on platforms like TikTok, because that's where the next generation goes for a lot of its information. And if they don't have accounts like yourself promoting it, then how are they going to find it because they don't necessarily go through the traditional channels as much as they should.
Definitely.
So thinking more generally, so it's a similar style of question, but it's more thinking about what drove you into engineering before it. Was there a eureka moment, or did you just always?
That question I feel like is a funny one for me. I feel like I've always wanted to be going to engineering, but now looking back at it as someone who's 25, I now think, was that my idea or was that something my parents kind of pushed me into the direction of? But that being said, I think I did have the influence of having a lot of family members who were in engineering. So, for example, my granddad was a civil engineer, and just hearing about some of the work he worked on in Nigeria, I think was inspiring to me. Also hearing, I've got two uncles, one who's electrical engineering and one who's mechanical engineering as well. So I think just having that influence around me and then just being curious as well, I think all of those things kind of led me to think maybe engineering's the pathway for me. But it's definitely something I wanted to do as a child. as well. I don't think I probably didn't understand what exactly engineering entailed, but I did think I do want to be an engineer.
It's interesting though, because like you say, I know from my own work in education research that a lot of children, typically when a field's well represented, and by the sounds of it, within your family, it's definitely engineering has been very well represented in various different shapes or forms, which even subconsciously can have an impact on a student's professional trajectory, because you're seeing your family members walking the walk and talking the talk, and that helps you to digest the information more readily. But the other thing that is clearly from the last two questions that you're very passionate about, and I'd love to unpack it a bit more, is with your dissertation focusing on the likes of renewable energy sources in Nigeria and clearly having connections with it. I'd love to know a bit more about that story.
So I think I was studying around the same time as COVID, and I think around COVID, I think especially with what happened with George Floyd, it really made me reflect on, I guess, my identity, and it made me reflect on. I'd kind of decided I didn't want to just do just a topic that there was a list of topics you could pick from in for the dissertation, or you could come up with your own. And I think because I was quite reflective during that time, it made me think from my experience of going to Nigeria when I was really young, and just hearing my experience from my family members in Nigeria. I just remember hearing so much about electricity isn't a constant thing in Nigeria. There'll be a time where during the day electricity will go, and then people would have to bring out generators. And in my head, I just felt like Nigeria has a lot of resources that would make renewable energy such a good source, but I feel like it was underutilized. So I just kind of thought, let me look into which renewable energy sources could be used, maybe why they're not currently being used, and that's the path it took me down of me making my dissertation. So I haven't looked at it in quite a while, but it's still an interest of me. And I think even though I'm at the early stage of my career, I can definitely something that definitely want to do later down the line is go from more just research to actually seeing if I can actually maybe bring some of these things into real life. That'll definitely be a challenge, and definitely not one I'll be taking lightly. But I think that's something I would definitely see in my future.
That sounds really interesting. And out of curiosity, which renewable resource did you find would be the most effective in Nigeria?
It was solar energy, solar machines, particularly in the northern regions of Nigeria. Those I think had the most. That's where I think the sun was the most intense, and it would be the best use. And also, I think just because of there's a lot of rural areas in Nigeria, so it needed a source that not necessarily needed to be connected to the grid to reach people in more rural areas. But I think there was a bit of a problem with that, is that the northern region I think it was more susceptible to attacks. So that was maybe one of the reasons maybe that hasn't been utilized as much as it should be. So that was some of the things I touched on a little bit, but I didn't go into too much detail about that.
So there's more social factors as well, rather than just, like you say, the infrastructure.
There's social factors that need to be considered as well.
So one of the things I want to find out a bit more about as well is just your own personal story and going a bit deeper into different points. And particularly when you think about where you are today in your career, who would you say was the inspiration for you to be who you are today, or specifically who's helped you on your journey so far?
Who's helped me on my journey? I think I've been fortunate enough to I think both my parents have definitely been my cheerleaders. I think there's never been a time where I think there's something with Nigerian cultures where a lot of children feel a lot of pressure to have high achieving grades and have parents who are, I guess, quite relentless in that pursuit for excellence. But I think I definitely feel like my parents, I think there was the pursuit for excellence, but I wouldn't say it was in a toxic way. It was a way that was supportive. It was a way that made me feel empowered to feel like I can achieve anything. So I definitely think my successes are definitely down to my parents. I think they're not in the engineering field per se, but I think giving a child the confidence to feel like they can do anything, I think does play a massive role. And I think particularly, in school, I wasn't a bad kid, but I wasn't maybe the highest achieving kid. I think when that happens, I think you can just be you're just another person. And I think in a way, I think that can be even worse than being maybe a naughty kid or a high achieving kid because you're just neglected. So I think maybe if it was just the influence from the teachers and not having my parents who were giving me my confidence, I don't know where I would be. So I'd definitely give it to my parents being the biggest influence in my.
No, and having taught in schools, I would certainly, I'm not by any means saying that this is right, but I can completely understand it does happen. The whole, when you're teaching, it's very easy to support the high achieving students, and you have to support the either students who are falling behind or might be a bit more disruptive. It's very easy to lose the quietest students who are in the middle, and I can certainly see that. I know it's one of those things that I would say most teachers are probably well aware of that problem. But the issue of being able to meaningfully solve it is a question that has been tried and tried again, but still there's very few actual silver bullets to fix it. But it's really refreshing to know that from your perspective on whether that be an accessibility, that just general, I would say mentor-like behaviors that your parents have provided in terms of being your professional self and pushing you forward without necessarily directing or steering you, I think is probably it. So they've scaffolded rather than steered you, by the sounds of it.
Yes, definitely. And even you just mentioned that reminds me of a story that happened to me when I was 16, just sort of GCSEs. So I think it was a question of whether I stay at my current school, which had a sixth form, but then there was another sixth form. It was a case where you could go on the day and apply if you didn't have a place beforehand. It's quite a high achieving sixth form in East London. Quite a few people went to Oxford and Cambridge from those sixth forms. So I remember on the day of I got my results, and I was with one of my friends who was one of the high achievers, and they were asking him about his grades. They were like, "Wow, that's so amazing." They were telling him, he was saying that he was going to a different school, and they were trying to convince him, "We really appreciate if you stayed here because you're just a great student." And I just remember not one teacher even asked me how I did, how were my grades. I think for me that was I think maybe a turning point. Probably the best one of the best turning points I think for me was I was kind of thinking I'm not recognized at this school really. They don't maybe they did care, but it felt like they didn't care. So I was thinking in my head, it's better for me to be in try get to the other school which had a lot of high achievers. And even if I am being ignored, at least I'm being surrounded by high achieving students who maybe might be able to push and elevate me rather than be in a stay at my sixth form where I know everyone and I'm just another number. And I think that change meant that I think I ended up leaving early. I went directly to the sixth form. And I think because I got there early, it meant that I was one of the fortunate people who was able to enroll on the day because of my grades. And I definitely think that transition was a major transition in terms of just the effort and the environment I was in. I think it was definitely a game changer for me because I think the people I was surrounded with in that sixth form I think it was definitely a most motivating environment I've ever been in. So it's interesting how that feeling of just being othered kind of led to a chain of events that led to where I was.
And I think what you're touching on as well is really interesting. Most people, when they think you might be middle of the pack, let's say, they generally conflate that. And I think this is a fair characterization, but please add anything that you feel like you want to add. Normally it's conflated with grades, that top achieving, middle achieving, lower achieving. And the assumption is that you can be seen and be top, middle, or bottom. You can feel seen by people. You can feel supported by it. You don't necessarily need to be the A-star student if we're talking about old money when I would have been at A-levels rather than the more number system that we have now. But when you can still feel seen in those environments, even if you're a B or C student. But by the sounds of it, it was the being othered, as you said, or not being seen by teachers and supported in that way. And like you say, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally, in some cases, I know this from sharing the story on the other side, not defending it, but just articulating what it can sometimes be. And will be a practice that most parents will have seen on their reports. When you write a report for the high achieving students, it's really easy to do because they're generally the one who holds their hands up every 5 seconds and you have loads to talk about. If you have a student that's struggling or a student that's disruptive, really easy to write their report. Whereas you might have 10 students out of every class who are that middle of the road, they need to put their hand up more. They need to take part more. It's putting the ownership more on the student to be seen and it's a practice that unfortunately happens because of most teachers' workloads, but it is a practice that nonetheless does happen. And I know from writing some of those reports, particularly early on in my teaching career, that it's something that you can learn and get better at, but certainly very early on, you can't just your recognition of all the various students when you're seeing maybe you've got not 10 students from that one group who are in the middle, but you've got 60 because you're teaching 6 different groups and so on. And they lose some of the students because in the respect that they blend into more of a homogenous group because they're the middle.
I've never considered that from the teacher's perspective. So that is good to hear.
I say teachers certainly most teachers, I would say, try to do it, but there are cases when that happens. I'm not sure if this was the same for you at school, but when you used to have the reports where your form tutor would have wrote the report, and their report is you're never taught by your form tutor because of how your sets fall. So they write the report, but they have no idea about you at all, which defeats the point of the report entirely. But that is a bureaucratic, bad teaching practice, and that's at the school level, not at an individual level. But just a point for those who are wondering about reports.
I don't think that happened in my school. I think each teacher you had wrote your report. But even going back to what I was saying before about my parents being a massive influence, even then, I think it was in year 7, year 8, they decided these are the A-star students. These are the students that perform badly. These are the B students. And it didn't matter what you did from that point on. It was, you're a B student, so can't see you as anything other than a B student. And I think that was something that my mum she really did push against, put this person in a box. And you can't really imagine a world of them outside of them being the B student. And she was very pushy to, what more does he need to do to maybe get to the A or the A star? And I think I definitely do appreciate my mum doing that and not just, I guess, allowing me to be put in a box. And then, because even I remember, it's something new they put when I was in year 11. It was based on your SATs results. So I think based on people's SATs results, if they were like, I think it was level 5. I think that's the highest you can get in SATs. I can't. Such a long. So if you got 5s in your SATs, then they'd give you more, and they'll give you more support so that you can achieve well for GCSEs. And I remember even having a friend at the time. He was one of the people, and he just felt like, is that their way of saying that they've given up on everyone else? They've only providing support to people they think they can boost their grades. So again, very grateful for pushing against that, I think.
And like you say, I think, unfortunately, and this is something I will criticise, is the league table mentality in schools, where it's how many A stars we can get, how many 9s or whatever in new money terms that we can get, and that's the thing that they care about. I do think, though, based on both your experience by the sounds of it and my own experience from leaving school to go to a different college, I think helps, because I think by giving them only a very short period to get to know you, they can't put you in that box in college because you're new. By the time they've got to know you, you're heading out of the door. Whereas a 5-year high school experience, they've known you for years and years, and they've got, no matter what you then, if you have a sudden change of heart, change of pace, change of whatever in year 9 and 10, they think of you as that year 7 or 8 student that they've seen grow and develop.
Definitely. I think that's a really great way of putting it. Even the 6th one I do think it did have its critiques. I think it was, I don't even know if it was true or not. I don't think it was, but I remember even hearing, going into it, is if you don't reach certain grades in year 12, then you get kicked out. You don't even make it to year 13. I don't know if that was true. I think I did have a few friends who maybe didn't do too well in the first year, in year 12, but were then able to stay on. I think they introduced, we didn't have politics or something as an A level, but they introduced it, and then they got to pick up politics. But I think they were definitely concerned about grades in my 6th form. So it definitely does have its critiques. But I think not having as long to, I guess, know us, definitely, I think if he does, I think does help against that. putting people in a box.
But like you say, it's something until we've had this conversation, I've never really thought about it to that degree in terms of how we structure it. And I know in East Anglia and a few other places, I'm not saying that this is a better system, but they used to have a free tier similar to the US. They had primary, then they had middle, then they had senior, and had a more broken up system. I'm not saying that is better, but I'm not sure about your own experience. I had just primary and high, and that was so I'm not sure if that's better or worse.
Mine was similar to that. So, yeah.
So one of the other things I'm interested in knowing, so we've touched on this somewhat already, but I'd love to know if you were thinking about your career, so you're going all the way towards the end of your career, what do you hope your impact will either be professionally or personally that you would love to see?
I think professionally, I think I'd hope that I'd be in a place where I'm able to progress to a point where I'm hoping that eventually I'll be able to mentor. I've done mentoring in the past. I'm hoping that people I mentor and people I will mentor in the future could look at what I've done and say, do you know what? He's done it. I've seen what is possible. And obviously, every situations are very different. I think definitely chance is definitely a big factor. But I hope that I'll be able to people will be able to see what I've done and be like, he's done it. He was even my mentor, so I know that it's possible and I can do it. And I have someone who can help guide me. I think personally, I just want to make an impact on the world. I don't want to leave the world in a better place than I found it. I don't want my career to be defined by money. I don't want money to be the deciding factor of my career. I think impact on the world is, I think, what I want my career to be known for.
Definitely very much similar to what guests I speak to normally in terms of having more of that personal impact, even through the professional side. And I can certainly see it from a lot of perspectives that particularly breaking down some of those barriers that students particularly will either experience, even if they don't perceive it. Whereas from my own position and my own perspective, I have less doors to break through with other people, and as a result, it's something I have to recognize from that point of view. But from the perspective of the mentoring side that you're offering, and whether that be academic, personal, or professional, I think that's what's needed from a representation point of view.
100%. I think even hearing back to my mum again, hearing her story, she says one thing she did say to me, I think, was what keeps her going now that she's maybe at the latter stage of her career is the people who she's mentoring, who she said, don't worry, I'll open the door for you. I'll be the one to step forward. That's what keeps her going and keeps her wanting to progress in her career, even though she's getting to the older stages. And I think similarly, I think that's something for me that I definitely do aspire to. I think it wasn't until I started working because I've definitely heard about all the barriers that you face growing up. And I think I've been in a very fortunate position where I've not necessarily had to think about it too much. It's only really when I started working, and I think the barriers that I faced weren't in the way I was expecting. So it's not like, I think maybe 30, 40 years ago, I think maybe the barriers you might face would be you'd definitely be able to see it. It would be wouldn't sugarcoat their words. But I think now it's the case of they don't even see you, you're just overlooked. I think the analogy, which is a good one, is that I think certain people are looking for oranges. And it doesn't matter how good of an apple you are. You could be the best apple there is. They won't see how good that apple is because they're looking for an orange. You don't fit what they're looking for. And I think that's been the biggest challenge I've had since I've started my career. And I'm only at the early stages of my career. I can already see it. And I think what makes it worse is that because it's so subtle, you kind of think, is this in my head? It's difficult in that way. And it was only through speaking to other people that I did find out it wasn't in my head. It's an experience that they've also had.
I think it's interesting because I think the other thing that comes up quite a lot, because I do a lot of research in the DEI space, and one of the challenges that tends to come up is individuals who, when listening to individuals like yourself and talking from your perspective of what you see, and the apple and oranges analogy, I think is a very good one, because one of the things that most people forget about is typically, it's not saying there isn't challenges for other people. It's more saying some individuals will have to work a lot harder to even if they're outperforming you in a lot of other areas, they need to work that much harder to even be seen in those perspectives. And then it's like, but I am working hard. And it's like, no one's saying that you aren't, but the other people have got to work harder in some respects to even have that conversation. And that's the challenge. And I think the other side from the DEI side is particularly a lot of people are very guarded about areas such as space. And the argument, for example, of communities is being able to take that step back. Someone like me should never lead on certain inclusivity conversations and has to basically say, this is an initiative, this is what we think might work, but then you hand those keys over, you hand the reins over to pretty much straight away to say, look, we will there'll be support there whatever way, shape or form you need. And I've done this with student projects, but basically where you go, we'll apply for the funding, but then you lead the project because it's got to be your story, not our story. And you take it however you want to take it, because if I take it, I'm going to come at it from the wrong side because I don't know your story. And that, I think, unfortunately, is where a lot of people fall foul of it, where they try. Some people might do it through bad intentions and good intention. I think there's a mixed bag. But I think there needs to be more open conversations and just asking people what they want and what they need, and then just being prepared to listen. But that's my take anyway.
I definitely agree with that take. I just think it goes down to allyship. I think the importance of allyship is so important. I don't think you want a space where you're with everyone who agrees with you. Then I think in a way you're kind of in this echo chamber where I think you need someone who's outside of that community who's also ready to champion you. I think those voices definitely cut through a lot more. I think if it's the same people, I think people are, in a way, are getting a bit tired. It's kind of like, oh, here we go, this again. I think sometimes if it is coming from a different voice, it's at least heard. At least I think it's not falling on deaf ears. I think so. I definitely agree with what you said there.
I think I would just want to echo a story that I read when I was very early on in my PhD, and it stuck with me through what we're talking about, which is this person was saying, so the book was focused on how people have been othered in meetings and in general. And one of the key things that they really highlighted in it, which I thought was particularly strong, is some people don't speak up. Not because they think that they don't have a voice and they don't feel like they have something to say, but purely based on the fact that they feel like if they speak up, they're going to be seen not as someone contributing, but someone who's disruptive or fitting into a particular perspective that those individuals see them in. And therefore, their voice is silenced. And as a result, colleagues in the room say similar ideas and then get promoted and so on, but they don't feel like they can have that voice in that space. And that is something profoundly different that I don't think people, if you haven't lived that experience, can have. And I definitely, whilst I can sympathize with it, I haven't had that experience. And that is something that I always have to reflect on when doing a lot of these projects.
I can definitely relate to that. I've definitely heard, I can't remember who said this to me, but you can argue whether it's a good or bad piece of advice, but someone saying to me, you don't want to be the black guy in the room always talking about race, because then I think you can get that label. Whereas I think people, maybe if someone else brought the same idea up, it might be received better. And this came about when I was involved with recruitment with my work, and I did feel like there were areas in where we could improve. But then I remember someone telling, I wish I remember who it was, but I do remember someone telling me, you don't want to be the black guy always talking about race. But I definitely think there was an opportunity for more diversity in recruitment. It was just the channels that we were using, which was mainly through referrals and LinkedIn. And I just feel like if the channels we're using are referrals, obviously we are likely to get similar people. So that was the point I was trying to make. Someone told me maybe I should take a step back because you don't want to constantly bring it up. And I guess you could be labeled as that guy, the disruptive black guy is always talking about race, which could, I guess, in a way, could prohibit, maybe derail your career a little bit, even if it's unconsciously, people might understand that.
Which, unfortunately, I can well imagine does happen, and it shouldn't be the case, but unfortunately that is also until the world drastically changes, those are the problems that need to be supported, be supported in different ways, and people need to be prepared to listen, to help, to support, and equally to allow is the wrong word, to champion the voices, but then champion in the right way, not dictate the voice. I think it's probably the best way of what some people view. If they're championing the cause, I need to be a front and center, and you don't need to be front and center, and you shouldn't be. So going off more thinking about your work again, so in terms of your career, what really excites you about what you do?
What excites me about what I do? I just think being involved with, so as we're moving away from, I guess, energy sources that require carbon, I think being involved in the change, I think particularly in the nuclear industry, there's so many exciting things going on right now. So the government just announced something like 14 billion for Sizewell C. Work I'm in, so the company I'm in, so have people working on nuclear fusion as well. Whether that will come about, there's the people who are believers and there's a number they're non-believers on that. But I think being in that space is also very exciting. There's new technologies of how nuclear will work, such as small modular reactors, which should make making nuclear power plants a lot cheaper because they are notoriously very, very expensive and usually go over budget. But I think just being in a space where there's innovation and there's so many new things that could be coming, I think for me that's what makes it really, really exciting. And just being involved in the changes that we're going to see in the UK, I think is also another exciting part.
And I think, like you say, I think it's interesting to see. I know the small modular reactors, they've had different people have said, I'm not sure if this is correct, so please do your insights. Different people have said they can be potentially safer sites as well, because if an area is liable to flooding, there's can be designed in a safer way than, say, some of the largest sites. That particular example, I believe, was talking about like relatively recent instances with nuclear power. I think the other one was, it's what I would like to get your take on is there's a lot of, obviously, not criticism, but it seems to be people are either very much for nuclear power or against nuclear power, and I would love to know a small take that you've got on this whole debate from works in the nuclear sector.
To be honest, I completely understand the stigma that nuclear power has, because I think it's the case of if something goes really, really wrong. And I think in the past, I think even if you look at things such as Chernobyl, I don't think those were handled particularly well. I think Chernobyl in its case is there's so many factors that made it as bad as it was, and I don't think it necessarily needed to be as bad as it was. But I think I can definitely see there's a stigma. Why there is a stigma against nuclear power, but I think the one thing about nuclear is that it's constantly learning from the mistakes that have been made in the past, and there's so many things that are going on right now to make sure that it's as safe as possible. I think what we're seeing more modern technology is like modes of safety. So like, you don't need someone to cause a shutdown. I think I've even made a video on it in one of my TikTok about nuclear safety, where instead of someone needing to there's like an overreaction, the reaction will regulate itself, as opposed to someone having to maybe push a particular button to make things safer. So I think there's so much opportunity, and I think as we're moving towards, we're moving away from carbon. We want to reduce carbon emissions. I think nuclear definitely is going to be around, and I think the more you get to know about it, I think there maybe should be a bit more education about it, a bit more on the safety aspect. I think that's kind of where I want to help in that, I guess, in that case. I think there's definitely so many safety aspects that come from it. And I think even just the job creation as well, like so many parts before anything's even put in, I think there's so many benefits that come from building a nuclear power. Like I think Sizewell C, there's going to be roads. So that means there's opportunity for people who want to build roads. There's going to be people who are coming to site. There's going to be, before you even get building, it's basically a construction site, and there's going to be loads of job creation from it as well. So I think there's definitely a lot of benefits, and I think it's just a case of what we do need. I think what things we haven't done in the past is be as open and honest about things. I think maybe the hiddenness of things is also what plays a part in people's skepticism about it. But definitely lots of safety measures that are in place, and I think definitely a lot safer than people people would, I guess, perceive.
No, I think that's fair. And I think the other thing that's quite interesting and most people don't think about is based on the construction side of facilities is unlike housing estates, which typically build the road after they build the houses, the nuclear, by its very nature, you need to have the facilities set up before the very hazardous material eventually moves in, or semi-hazardous, because I don't know enough about the process to know how safe it is from different points in transport.
Yeah. I don't know too much about the whole transportation process. It's not something I've involved with too much, but even that is, yeah, transport aside, there's no reactions going on until much later down the line. Yeah, I think that's another
point of clarification.
Yeah, nothing to clarify. Yeah.
So, briefly going into a bit of a gimmick that I have on this is your story in 10 words or less. So, guests can talk about themselves, and the individuals who find you for the first time can have a bit of an insight into you as a broader individual. Can you start off by telling me, what did you want to be when you were younger?
I wanted to be an engineer.
Engineer. You've definitely succeeded in the younger you's goal. And how do you want people to see you?
Great, good question. Really stumped me with that question. How do I want people to see me? I want people to see me as just someone who, yeah, I think I want people to see me as an average guy who just happens to get into a field just out of because he was curious, not because he was maybe a genius growing up or because yeah. I just want people to see me as just the average person who they can look up to, I'd say.
Can you describe your field or work in 10 words or less?
Fuel, split, heat, electricity, I'm going to say. Fuel splits, then heat is made, which makes electricity.
And what is the biggest challenge in your field?
I guess in the field itself, maybe not on a personal level, I think the biggest challenge in the field is, I guess, the perception of nuclear energy. I think that's the biggest challenge there, is trying to change the perception of it. I think biggest challenge in my field in terms of me as a junior engineer is, I guess, getting the experience needed to progress. I think what we see a lot more of now is a lot more, I think stuff that you probably would have your grad do back in the day is now being outsourced a lot. So trying to get experience, definitely a challenge. Challenge in my work environment when I first started, and I'm seeing it with new grads who are starting now, is trying to get experience, especially because what we do is secondments, and secondees don't necessarily, they just want someone who, I guess, oven baked. And coming out of university, there's not, I think there's a disconnect there where people just come out of university, they, especially in engineering, you really don't know a lot. Trying, so you, like, giving you a chance to then progress is definitely challenging. I think there might be, I don't know if this is going to be the case, but it could be a problem where your entire career based on the first person who gave you a chance, and you kind of pigeonhole. You want like a variety of experience, and I think that is definitely a challenge that I can see my field as a junior engineer.
Okay. Last question, a bit more off the rest of them, is what is a surprising fact about you?
I think the surprising fact about me is I think I'm quite well traveled over the past maybe 2 years. I've visited about 10 countries. 10 countries in the past 10 years, past 2 years. I got a job and I was like, you know what? I need to see more. So yeah, I've been to some interesting countries, I think.
That's the end of that little segment. But what I would love to know a bit more, in terms of picking up more on, not the last question, but the question before, is if this is the case, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out, whether in your field or going to engineering at university, whichever way you want to take it?
Okay. I think someone who's just going into university, I would definitely say, I'm going to take just starting out as not necessarily going into university, actually. I would say consider that you don't necessarily need to, university is not the only option when it comes to engineering. There are apprenticeships. And I think definitely make the decision based on you as a person. I think people work in different ways. So I'd say don't forget that there's not just one route to becoming an engineer. I think that's the first piece of advice I'd give to them. I think if someone does take the university route, I would say definitely make the opportunity to do the internships, do the summer work placements, because it'll give you a real feel of how engineering will work in the real world. It'll also give you some sort of experience that would probably help you grad job. And as you know, it's definitely not easy to get a grad job nowadays. It's ridiculously hard. So you want, and I think particular people, if you've done internships, they're more likely to bring you back when you are a grad. So I'd say that's another thing. And then there's also another thing I would say highlight is there's developmental programs who are trying to make you ready. So like, for example, the Royal Academy of Engineering, for example, they have developmental programs who are trying to help people from underrepresented backgrounds. So definitely apply for those. I think if someone who's just started out in their career, who's graduated now, and maybe starting their first job, I would say the first thing is to definitely, I think, at least, especially if it's a consultancy, I work in engineering consultancy, I think I'd argue that who you know is probably the most important thing starting out. I'd say maybe 50% is who you know, maybe your reputation, and then like actually performance at the very start. I think, yeah, try and network with as many people as possible. Make it clear with your line manager or whoever's senior of what your intentions are, what your goals are. Let them know where you are. It's kind of what we talked about in school. Maybe if you were the quiet person in school and you just kind of out with your day, I think when it comes to a career, I think you kind of have that luxury. You kind of point at yourself a little bit, like, this is what I've done. Look at me. For people to actually see you, give you the recognition you deserve, and I think that would help you progress in your career. Because once people know this is what you've done and you have that reputation, I think it can help you progress further.
Okay, thank you for that. And the thing I always get my guests to do on this podcast is ask a question forward. So a question for the next content educator, either about their research, their content, their career, however you want, whatever question you want to ask. You don't know who's coming. Question would you like to ask?
I've got a bit of a long-winded one, so maybe a parts to it. So my question would be, what do you want to do when you were a child? What did your parents want you to do as a child? What are you doing now, and are you happy? I think those are the long part. Is what I'd want to ask the next person.
And it's really interesting, the last bit, are you happy? Because I think so many people think, are you successful? Not necessarily, are you happy? To be fair, the question from my last guest was along similar lines to an extent, but more about a recipient. How would you explain your work to those outside of academia? So a school kid, a member of the public, your grandparents. How would you explain what you do to a lay audience?
Funny enough, I actually did try to explain what I did to my grandma last week. Specific role or just like the industry in particular? Try to explain them both. So in terms of my job role, I work in nuclear energy. So I would say in nuclear energy, we have atoms all around us. We split atoms, it releases energy. So in that we do is we split energy, it releases heat. We use that heat, create steam. That steam then turns a turbine, and that turbine is connected to a generator, which then produces electricity, which goes into the mains, goes into our country to fund our electricity. And then I say my particular role, we are building a nuclear power plant. There are lots of that you need to install into the power plant. My job is technical oversight. So when you're buying the equipment, you need to make sure that it is, I guess, fit for purpose for what you actually want. Sometimes the person you're buying the equipment from might not be able to meet all the requirements you need. So you need to make sure that, I guess from a technical perspective, that the equipment's okay. So I oversee that from procurement all the way until it's shipped onto site. And then once it's shipped onto site, then it gets passed on to another team called operations who install it onto site. And then once the pre-operations team's into site, it then moves on to another team called commissioning who test the equipment. And after the equipment is tested, it then moves on to operations who are part of the operating of the nuclear power plant. So I'm at the very, very stage of the cycle of equipment.
Okay. And before this is the last question, if try to answer as briefly as you can now. What is it about your work that inspires you to get up every morning?
I think contributing to society, contributing to the UK, that for me is what helps me get up. And knowing that what I'm doing could benefit loads of people from, I think that's what helps me get up every day.
Well, thank you very much, Tosin, for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me on Sitting Down with Scholars. And just before I sign off, is there any social media handles or other pages or groups that different people could find your work or follow along for the ride?
Yes. So I have a TikTok called Science. It's spelled SHO. So that's like I put my science show on TikTok, and find me on Instagram. Similarly, science. I think Instagram is the science show. But I'm sure we'll put that in the yeah.
Okay, very much for taking the time, and thanks again for joining me on Sitting Down with Scholars. And please tune in next week for another exciting guest and scholar.
Okay. Thank you for having me.